Here we go.
All right. So, thanks for being here. This is our last week in this series on From Slavery to the Promised Land, and tonight we're looking at the people who are on the border. They're ready to go into the land, and we're going to renew the covenant again, because apparently the last time didn't take either. So the covenant will be renewed one more time. Last week we were in Exodus chapter 34. God and the people of Israel had made a covenant in Exodus chapter 24. Then we had the golden calf incident. Here's a slide with the golden calf. And then God renewed the covenant again after that golden calf incident broke the covenant before the people had even left Mount Sinai. Now since then, if we had read everything up until the beginning of Deuteronomy, all that stuff in the middle, we would have seen how the people constructed the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant according to God's instructions. God gives them additional laws to follow. They got to the Promised Land. They were afraid to go in, and then they camped out in the desert for a generation. The idea that they wandered in the desert for 40 years is not really accurate. They spent most of that time camped in one place. It's also true that the reason they were out there so long was not that they wouldn't ask for directions. Some people think that it's that the men were driving, and they said, "Oh, I know where we're going." Right. But that wasn't it. Finally, they were ready to go into the land. God clears the way for them. And now they're in Moab, east of the Jordan River, and they are ready to go into the land. This map, here's the next slide. Where did my slide go? What happened? Here we go. This slide shows, this red line shows how they came up north from where they had been camped. They get to this area that is just north of the Dead Sea, across east of the Jordan River, and they are camped there. They are getting ready to go into the land, and Moses gives them a bunch of sermons, or maybe the longest single sermon you have ever heard. The book of Deuteronomy records those sermons, or that one long sermon, as the words of Moses. The Hebrew name for the book could translate literally as words, but it's a repetition of law that they've had before, or perhaps a reinterpretation as they're getting ready to go into the land. The name Deuteronomy, which is what we call it in English, literally means something like second law. So it's a second telling of the laws that they've already received earlier. Now, some people think that Deuteronomy is a book which was found when King Josiah was remodeling the temple in about 620 BC, meaning that it was written before then, but it had been lost or misplaced, and they discovered the book in 2 Kings chapter 22. I am unconvinced by this theory. There are other theories, but this is a commonly held theory about where the book came from. We don't know. And as you might guess, I don't care. What's clear is that the authors of the book of Deuteronomy influenced the people who wrote what we call the history in the Christian tradition. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. And the authors of those history books see Israel's history and the failure of the people in Israel and the northern kingdom. They see this in terms of the theology of the book of Deuteronomy. So this book is really influential on how we read those next several books in the Old Testament. And the most important thing about everything in the Old Testament is that it was Jesus' Bible. It shaped his understanding of his ministry. It shaped how the people of first century Israel saw and understood his ministry. And it also shapes how they understood themselves. And for that matter, it was Paul's Bible. We'll spend some time looking at some passages from Paul tonight. At the beginning of the book, Moses spends 20-some chapters giving a summary of everything that happened after they left Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb, repeating the Ten Commandments, and reminding people of, or reinterpreting, more of the commandments that are in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And one of the things that we often miss is how the Old Testament requires caring for poor people. The authors of those history books focused on the fact that people failed to worship only the true God. People worshiped other gods. But the other thing that they miss, and you pick this up if you read the books we call the prophets, was how they failed to follow the commandments that had to do with the poor, or caring for a phrase that's used often as aliens, widows, and orphans. So with that, I want to look at Deuteronomy Chapter 15. I think on your sheets we have Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 11. Would somebody read that for us?
At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. However, there need be no poor people among you, for in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you, if only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow all these commandments I am giving you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The seventh year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land.
All right, thanks, Dave. So, I don't know if you noticed the structure of this. It begins with telling people to forgive debts every 7 years. And they were supposed to forgive debts every 7 years, in part because the people were supposed to let the land lie fallow every 7 years. That apparently was a substitute for crop rotation or fertilizer. Every 7th year, you would just leave whatever was left from last year in the field. It would get absorbed by the soil, it provides some nutrients, and then you can grow crops for up to 6 years. So the land was getting a sabbatical or a Sabbath, and if you're not farming your land, you don't have any income. So if you owed money to anybody, they were supposed to forgive your debts. And at verse 4 goes, there will be no one in need among you, because the Lord is sure to bless the land. All you have to do is obey everything. That sounds so simple, doesn't it? Right. Then it goes on, but if there's anyone in need, if you have a needy neighbor, don't be hard-hearted or tight-fisted. Willingly lend to your neighbors who need some help. And don't be cheap, because it's year 6, and you're supposed to forgive the debt next year. Lend or give generously anyway. Don't worry about getting paid back. Banks couldn't operate that way, could they? No. And then finally, it's since there will always be poor people, open your hand to the poor and needy. There's a real transition from verse 4 to verse 11. First, it starts off in verse 4, it's there don't need to be any poor people. You all are going to have enough. In verse 7, but if there's anyone in need, Then by verse 11, it's, there will always be poor people, so help each other out. It's a pretty rapid transition, isn't it?
That doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, well, there's enough for everybody, but you're going to mess this up, right? There will always be poor people. You're going to mess this up in one way or another, so take care of those poor people. I want to look at just a couple of related New Testament passages. When you read this verse about how there will always be poor people, you might have thought of Matthew 26 or John 12, where we have that famous phrase, the poor will be with you always, which some people would read as an excuse not to care about those poor people because you're always going to have them. Or some people would read as saying, oh, but you can always do something to help poor folks. So now I want to get to, here's the structure. I missed a cue here. Here's that structure of Deuteronomy 15:1 through 11. No poor people. If there are poor people, there will always be poor people. And then we get to the rich man and Lazarus. This is from Luke 16. It's on the bottom of the first page of your scripture notes, and then carrying over to the second page. If somebody would read that for us, I'd appreciate it.
There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, do you say Hades? Or Hades?
Just say it however you want.
Okay, in Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. Excuse me, sorry.
Go right ahead.
But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Abraham said to him, the rich man, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.
Thanks, Mary. So according to Hayes, and he's one of the authors whose books I recommended you look at if you wanted to do some independent extra credit study. The teachings of the Old Testament, meaning Moses and the prophets, including Deuteronomy 15, which we just looked at, is really at the heart of this story. The rich man and the poor man, Lazarus, have a change in fortune after the judgment. They get reversed. And that happens all the time in Luke. Our earthly expectations get reversed because they're not consistent with God. Now, Luke doesn't tell us that Lazarus was particularly virtuous, which I think is interesting. And he doesn't tell us that the rich man was evil, except that he didn't help Lazarus. And it's not that wealth is evil in and of itself. 1 Timothy 6 tells us that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, but doesn't tell us that money in and of itself is evil. And in our society, of course, you gotta have some money to live, right? But the rich man is hoarding wealth, and he's ignoring his obligations under the covenant, including Deuteronomy 15, to help people who are less well off than he is. I think probably almost every December I've heard a sermon on Mary's song from Luke chapter 1. It's in a song that I know some churches that sing. He has cast the mighty down from their thrones. He's lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and he sent the rich away empty. Again, our earthly earthly expectations of how things work getting messed with by God. And this is simply evidence that God is on the side of the poor and the oppressed, and Christ followers are called to be on their side too. So with that, we have some discussion questions. If you would take about, I'll say 10 to 15 minutes and just let me know when you're done going through that first set of discussion questions. And there's a slide that says discussion questions.